Dawn of War 4 over the last few months has had several trailers, battle reports, interviews, blog posts, but now Games Workshop has released a pretty interesting breakdown of Dawn of War 4 in their newest edition of the White Dwarf magazine. In fact, a massive part of this latest issue of White Dwarf is entirely dedicated to the game, with an exclusive interview with the creative director, Jan Theysen, giving over new developer insights, loads of screenshots, faction breakdowns, commander reveals, and even a look back through more than 20 years of Dawn of War history. If you've been following the game closely, then there's still plenty here that's worth talking about, because some of these pages either expand on things we already knew, or finally explain why certain decisions were made. As it happens, one of the first things that the magazine makes clear is just how important Dawn of War has been to Warhammer as a whole. It reminds us that back in 2004, the original game wasn't simply another licensed strategy title. For a huge number of people, it was actually their first introduction to Warhammer 40k. As it happens, my gateway into Warhammer was actually the Warhammer 40k Dawn of War Definitive Edition. It was only released, maybe 1 year ago, and that's actually how I got into Dawn of War, and here I am now publishing videos yapping all about Dawn of War every other day. Some of you guys have already shared your journey with Warhammer to me in the comment section below, but I'd love to hear some more stories. Some of the stories have been pretty incredible, and I'm sure there's plenty more interesting stories that I just haven't come across yet. I'd love to read them in the comment section below. Now, for a huge number of people, Dawn of War was actually their first introduction to Warhammer 40k. Plenty of today's hobbyists didn't even discover the tabletop first, they actually discovered Dawn of War. But what's interesting is that the White Dwarf edition also points out that this relationship eventually went both ways. Originally, the Blood Ravens only existed for the video game, but over the years they've actually become pretty integrated into Warhammer lore through novels, miniatures, and official publications. Now, 2 decades later, the tabletop is taking some inspiration from the games just as much as the games once borrowed from the tabletop. And that's actually why this particular White Dwarf issue includes a Blood Ravens transfer sheet so hobbyists can build the chapter that first appeared on their computer screens over 20 years ago. Now, the interview with Jan Theysen starts with his own history of Warhammer, and it's pretty clear that he's exactly the kind of person you'd want directing a project like this. He talks about discovering Warhammer as a teenager, eventually getting deep into the hobby, painting thousands of points of armies, and regularly playing tabletop games. That experience shows throughout the interview, because whenever he talks about adapting Warhammer into an RTS, he's constantly thinking about preserving what makes each faction feel unique, rather than simply copying tabletop rules directly. One of the biggest questions he answers is actually why Dawn of War 4 looks so much closer to the original game than Dawn of War 2 or 3. According to Jan, the team actually spoke to a large number of players about what they remembered most from the first Dawn of War, and the answer was surprisingly consistent. People had remembered building bases, expanding their economy, researching upgrades, and commanding massive armies. Those were the emotions that the developers wanted to recreate. Instead of simply copying the mechanics though, their goal became recreating the feeling that players had back in 2004, just this time with more modern technology. Now, that philosophy influences almost every system in the game. Jan explains that Dawn of War 4 contains around 110 different units and buildings across the 4 launch factions, each with their own abilities and upgrades. Even then, he says they are barely scratching the surface of what Warhammer 40k has to offer. One thing I found particularly interesting was the discussion about faction identity. The developers weren't trying to force every army into perfectly symmetrical gameplay. Instead though, they wanted every faction to feel like it plays the way you'd imagine from the tabletop and the lore. Space Marines are exactly what you'd expect. They'll be elite, expensive, and incredibly powerful. You'll usually be outnumbered, but every squad matters. Their units can arrive through drop pods or Thunderhawks, allowing you to reinforce the battlefield almost anywhere instead of marching replacements across the map. That mobility, combined with their elite stats, means they will reward careful positioning much more than overwhelming numbers. The Orcs though couldn't be much more different. Their buildings are cheap, they are constantly expanding, and they are designed to flood the battlefield. The developers even joke that the orcs don't really care whether their buildings are sturdy or remotely health and safety compliant. Their entire economy is about growing quickly, replacing losses, and keeping the pressure on. Now, the Necrons presented a different design challenge because, unlike the other factions, Necrons famously come back from the dead. Rather than simply giving every unit infinite revives though, the team built that mechanic directly into their base through the Resurrection Galleries. Every gallery can resurrect one destroyed unit type, meaning both players have meaningful strategic decisions to make. The Necron player has to decide which units are worth bringing back, while the opponent has an obvious target if they want to permanently eliminate key threats. And then lastly, at least with regards to the 4 factions on launch, there is the Adeptus Mechanicus. This faction continues looking like one of the most mechanically unique armies in the game. They are fast, heavily focused on ranged combat, and make use of the new Sphere network. This allows them to detect enemy movement hidden inside the fog of war. Instead of simply overpowering opponents, they will rely much more on positioning, battlefield awareness, and technological superiority. Now, the magazine also actually revisits why these 4 factions were chosen in the first place. Space Marines and Orcs were obvious choices because, of course, they are pretty inseparable from Dawn of War's identity. Necrons were selected because they were one of the biggest factions introduced after the original Dawn of War was released, and according to Jan Theysen, the developers always felt disappointed that the Dark Crusade version of the Necrons never continued into Dawn of War 3. Now, with those 3 decided, that actually only of course left one final launch slot. And after looking through the huge range of available factions, the developers settled on the Adeptus Mechanicus because they felt that they offered gameplay unlike any else in the roster. Of course though, White Dwarf couldn't resist on teasing future content either. They did say that there will be further factions of course, and we kind of know that now with the DLC, but as I'm sure you will guess, they will not quite let us know what that faction will be, at least not yet. Now, another section of the interview focuses on commanders, and there are some quite nice details here actually that weren't previously explained. The team wanted every commander to feel distinct rather than simply acting as a stronger version of simple regular units. Asteran, the Dark Angel's company master, is described as a slow but incredibly durable frontline leader who excels when advancing alongside Terminators or Blade Guard veterans. Ezrael, meanwhile, fills almost the opposite role. He's much faster, he hits hard, and is designed to constantly move around the battlefield, supporting different parts of the army. The magazine also actually confirms that every commander comes with a wide selection of equipment and unlockable abilities, allowing players to customize them into different battlefield roles instead of locking them into one playstyle. Jan also reveals his personal favourite commander, and it's Armok, the Necron Skorpek Lord. Apparently, the team originally built destroyers to be relentless melee killing machines, but during development, a bug actually caused them to stand at range firing instead of charging forward. Rather than simply fixing it immediately, the developers actually liked the accidental behaviour so much that it inspired defensive weapon options for destroyers, giving players more flexibility depending on how they wanted to build the unit. Outside the interview, there's plenty of gameplay discussion as well. The magazine highlights the enormous increase in battle size compared to previous games, mentioning that players will command considerably more units than before. The new combat director system was also mentioned, which dynamically creates melee interactions between individual units. Because of this, rather than squads simply standing next to each other swinging weapons in sync, there will be countless different animations where soldiers block, dodge, shove, and execute enemies depending on what's happening around them. Visually, the screenshots throughout the feature are probably some of the best that I've seen so far. There are large battlefield shots showing massive orc assaults, crashing into Blood Raven's defensive lines, close-ups of the Adeptus Mechanicus walkers, and huge Necron engagements filled with green energy weapons lighting up the battles. The final section of the feature though is something that longtime fans of Dawn of War will probably appreciate the most. The magazine dedicates 2 full pages to the complete history of Dawn of War, starting all the way back in 2004 with the original game before moving through Winter Assault, Dark Crusade, Soulstorm, Dawn of War 2, Chaos Rising, Retribution, and Dawn of War 3. It doesn't stop there either though. The timeline includes the Blood Ravens novels, Gabriel Angelos' tabletop miniature, the definitive edition, which is actually what sparked this all for me, and finally Dawn of War 4 itself. Seeing everything laid out together really reminds you just how much this series has expanded beyond simply just being a collection of strategy games. Overall, of course, this White Dwarf feature won't reveal one massive surprise that completely changes everything we know about Dawn of War 4, but that's not really what makes it valuable. Instead, it brings together much of the developer interview news, gameplay philosophy, and faction design into one place, while adding plenty of extra details that help explain why the game looks and plays the way it does. It feels like a celebration of the series as a whole, recognizing just how influential Dawn of War has been over the past 20 years, not just for RTS fans, but for Warhammer itself. It certainly was a pleasant read, and you might actually just want to pick up a copy just for the visuals. In any case, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and make sure, by the way, you drop your comment in the comment section below about how you got into Warhammer. I'm pretty excited to read some of your stories. Just to let you guys know as well, as a heads up, I have been preparing videos as a deep dive for the Adeptus Mechanicus, as well as the Necrons from the previous battle report, so make sure that you are subscribed so you can check out those when they release. As always though, take care and see you next time.